Before we start, just a note to let you know that this episode was recorded online, so sound may be variable. Kia ora and welcome to this episode of the Amateur Austenite. I'm Frances Duncan, an author and the founder of the Jane Austen Society of New Zealand / Aotearoa. My special guest today is Elsa Keinberger, who's joining me all the way from London.
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be here today.
Elsa, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
I'm Elsa and I'm doing a PhD at the moment in London in comparative literature. So I'm actually studying the end of the 19th century and I'm looking at this actress named Elizabeth Robbins and her imagination of the North by looking at how she translates gender as well as imperialism in her fiction on Alaska and translations of Scandinavian texts, which include plays as well. I got into Jane Austen because I always read her in high school, but then a professor that I worked with at Pacific Lutheran University had started the Jane Austen Review back in, I want to say 2019, but it may have been earlier than that. And Dr. Adela Ramos would invite people to submit articles, and so I submitted a few times, and then together with Madeline Scully, I started to do some more work with the review and kind of helped with the Eco Austen annotation project. So that has sort of shifted form throughout the past few years. That is something that I really enjoy doing, so I'm glad to be a part of it.
And we're hoping to have Adela on the podcast soon too.
That's great. She's going to be excellent.
Today we're going to be discussing Letter 29. Letter 29, Lady Susan to Mrs. Johnson. Upper Seymour Street. My dear Alicia, there needed not this last fit of the gout to make me detest Mr. Johnson, but now the extent of my aversion is not to be estimated. To have you confined, a nurse, in his apartment! My dear Alicia, of what a mistake were you guilty in marrying a man of his age! Just old enough to be formal, ungovernable, and to have the gout. Too old to be agreeable, and too young to die. I arrived last night about 5, and had scarcely swallowed my dinner when Mannering made his appearance. I will not dissemble what real pleasure his sight afforded me, nor how strongly I felt the contrast between his person and manners and those of Reginald to the infinite disadvantage of the latter. For an hour or two I was even staggered in my resolution of marrying him, and though this was too idle and nonsensical an idea to remain long in my mind, I do not feel very eager for the conclusion of my marriage, or look forward with much impatience to the time when Reginald, according to our arrangement, is to be in town. I shall probably put off his arrival under some pretence or other. He must not come till Mannering is gone. I am still doubtful at times as to marriage. If the old man would die, I might not hesitate, but a state of dependence on the caprice of Sir Reginald will not suit the freedom of my spirit, and if I resolve to wait for that event, I shall have excuse enough at present, in having been scarcely 10 months a widow. I have not given Mannering any hint of my intention, or allowed him to consider my acquaintance with Reginald as more than the commonest flirtation, and he is tolerably pleased. Adieu till we meet. I am enchanted with my lodgings. Yours ever, S. Vernon. Yeah, she's not a great person, but why do I love her so much?
I kind of struggled with that reading this because I think I've read Lady Susan before, and I don't think I paid that much attention to it. It was sort of, I had one of those small little Penguin, you know, those £1 or $1 books, and it was great. I'll just read straight through this and, you know, have it be fluff. But this reading, Lady Susan is brutal, but she's so fun. And especially in her letters to Alicia, she's the kind of friend you'd want to have. Like, she's one of those friends that it doesn't matter if you're in the right or wrong, she's going to stick up for you. Of course, right now, too, she's on Alicia's side because it benefits herself. This is not good at all, the fact that she can't see her friend who she's come to London to be with because her husband conveniently has a case of the gout. But there's just something about these letters between Susan and Alicia that's just, it's such a different tone than anything else. It really feels, I think, the closest to how I would write to my friends. Maybe not with as much sass.
Yeah, there's not the formality that there tends to be in other people's letters. Maybe that's why Lady Susan's so enjoyable, because she's so modern and relatable. I mean, also horrible, but we can recognise her as a more modern woman.
There's so many parts in this letter that are just brutal. She's hoping that Reginald's father will die rather than have to put up with him as a possible father-in-law. But then, like you said too, there is that modernity in the fact that the issues that she's raising are very real concerns, like the way that she starts out with, oh, Alicia, you shouldn't have to take care of this person. She's sort of worried about her friend being trapped in a caretaking role. And there's also the fact that often much younger women marry much older men at this time, and the kind of issues that creates. As the reader, you're sort of put back because it's Lady Susan writing this. You're not technically supposed to take anything she says too seriously, but there is something very substantial underneath all of that.
Following on from what you were saying about whether you take it seriously or not, the fact that it's written means you take it more seriously, because people often like, God, I wish my husband would die. But you don't take it seriously. But because she's gone to the effort of writing it, it seems like it's that much more serious. And you've got to wonder, how serious is Lady Susan about these things? Is it just her being jib with her friend? But also when it comes to her relationship with Mannering and Reggie, is that really a serious thing? Or is she like, well, I have to marry at some point. How am I going to manage this and keep everybody happy? I struggle because I really want to be on Lady Susan's side despite her being a despicable person.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to Austen's writing, the fact that she's able to make her still quite likable, even though she's ostensibly the villain here, if you're going to cast that on. But then why do we have to have sort of a villain when really it's, not to be cliche, but it's really the society that is the villain in this case, because there's all these rules that people are supposed to follow, and any misstep really then brings them up against the fear of losing their reputations and so on. And this letter is really the first time that you see her compare, I think, Mainwaring and Reginald. And that was really interesting to see her she talks a lot about doubt, but also it almost seems like she has some real feelings here for Mainwaring, like as soon as she's in his company.
I will not dissemble what real pleasure his sight afforded me. But I mean, she said before that she does prefer him to Reggie because he tells her how beautiful and how wonderful and how great she is and doesn't question her the way that Reggie does. But she is still having to manage him. She doesn't want him to know about Reggie. She doesn't want them to meet. He must not come till Mannering is gone. Have not given Mannering any hint of my intention, or allowed him to consider my acquaintance with Reginald as more than the commonest flirtation. Because he was feeling jealous, and now he's feeling tolerably appeased. But the amusing thing, whether she has feelings for Mannering or not, I mean, in another letter she says, as much as I can feel for anybody, is that Mannering's potentially getting jealous, but this is a woman that he's having an affair with. His primary relationship is with his wife. He is having an affair with this woman, and he is then getting jealous of her potentially having somebody else in her life. Does he have any right to try and limit her seeing anybody else? Sure, you can't help emotion. He has total right to feel jealous, but trying to limit her interactions with other men when she has not made a commitment to him, they are not married. They're obviously not monogamous because he is still with his wife. This is all very revolutionary for that period of time, obviously.
Right.
But she's also trying to better her situation. If she marries Reggie, it betters her situation, but she's still concerned about keeping Mannering happy and then can't tell him that this might be what happens because it's what she needs to do. It's like her going out and getting a job and him going, no, but I don't want you to work. I think something that comes up that you were talking about that you hit on a little is the roles of men and women during this period in time. Women are a little bit objects, they're passed from father to husband, etc., and married off. But in this, Lady Susan is flipping the script.
Absolutely.
How can I use these men to my advantage? Obviously, Alicia, you went into your marriage with a particular thing in mind. Unfortunately, didn't work out as planned. Turns out he wasn't old enough. You married him too young. He's not going to die.
I love the old enough to be agreeable part where basically she's like, oh, he's cantankerous. That's not acceptable.
But as you were saying, she is trapped. She has to nurse him, which realistically she should want to. Obviously, he's her husband. She should want to be there to care for him. But also, they have servants who can do that. And she can be, maybe actually when we say nurse him, it doesn't actually mean doing much other than being there. And the servants are doing the work, but she is there.
Yeah, I was curious too. I sort of looked back to refresh my memory about what laws are in place. Because as you're saying, women are property at this time when they're married. Being a widow, like Lady Susan, holds a lot of power. You see her in this playing her cards to try to maintain as much power as possible. And if she has to marry, to then figure out what's going to be the best way to maintain her own autonomy. Alicia and her husband, Mr. Johnston, the court for divorce and matrimonial causes, that wasn't set up until 1857 in England. I think Austen's writing this in the late 1790s or so. They're in their marriage ostensibly for the rest of their lives. Lady Susan herself, because she's a widow, she's got her inheritance, or she's provided for through either the dowager or the jointure laws. And so she doesn't have to ask anyone how to use her money. She's operating on her own system, whereas married women don't have the rights to property, at least not yet. I think there's the Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882 that then begin to change that. That's where my late 19th century knowledge now starts to help me come into effect here. But the fact that Lady Susan is only 10 months a widow is really interesting because she hasn't yet been a full year in mourning. And that means different things. Like, right, she is still new to the kind of power that she has. But also, again, going back to what the reputation or what's sort of socially acceptable at that time, I think for a spouse, you're supposed to mourn for about a year. So here she is, not quite at the end of that, and she's already setting up her next steps. It's all these things that people would pick up on in the Regency period without needing to go read a bunch of articles like I definitely did in order to figure out all of this.
A year of mourning was generally accepted, but people did also get married a lot faster back then because you kind of needed to have a spouse to help run the house and run your life. So you'll see people getting married. Like Martha Lloyd got married when she was in her 60s or 70s, sometime really late, to one of Austen's brothers. And that seems so surprising because it was her first marriage and given her age, but that's what you do. You get married to have someone help run things, but also possibly in that situation it was a little bit, she needs someone to support her. And you can't have an unmarried man and woman living together. So the easiest way is to marry her. Because Martha, I'm going to assume, was a little like a sister to the Austen brothers because she lived with the Austen females.
There's so much more involved as well. There's a lot of class or wealth-based issues that then go into that because, of course, Lady Susan has the option to not marry because she has wealth, or at least up until a certain point.
She did. I kind of get the impression that she doesn't anymore, like she spent it all.
I see. Yeah. So, like you're saying, too, if you are struggling with finances, you do also need to get married because, you know, your other options are not great. You might be able to go into work, but then that lowers your class from a reputation standpoint, or, you know, it's very difficult working conditions.
Women weren't educated to be able to do much. Some of that is they thought that women didn't have the brains, but I suspect that some of it was also keeping women in their place. If you haven't got the education, you can't have different ideas and you can't leave and do stuff. And
is this right too? There's the two social spheres, right? So there's like the private women's sphere and then more public men's sphere. And then if there's any kind of crossover in that, then women are sort of compared to like sex workers. Like because they're, instead of kind of being at home and like helping with the family, if they're taking on like a more active public life, then because they're being shared in society, that suddenly also has like a sexual connection, which is unwanted, but it's still there nonetheless.
There were certain places where women could socialise with men, yes, but there were a lot of male-only areas, experiences, like they had clubs and coffee houses and things like that. Yeah, the only women that you would see in those places were women of a lower class and potentially sex workers. Yeah, it's very easy for them to just assume that you're a sex worker. Like, there's a woman in this space, therefore, like you see it in all the Regency romances that they write now. They're like, there's a woman walking alone, so men are going to come up to her and try and rape her. I'm not sure how true that is, but they do it in so many of those novels.
That is an interesting connection to the modern day, too, if that's something that people are, as they're looking back on that, is it kind of a corrective course in the society to be like, okay, this is still potentially like an issue for people walking alone at night.
True.
And the ways, there's still a lot of ways in which, of course, Lady Susan, as we're talking about the way that she kind of suits the modern day, there's much more overlap as well. It's really interesting as well in thinking about what Austen kind of hints at, because it seems also with the letter format, she withholds information and then shares it in such a fine-tuned way, and it's very surprising to me to think how young she is as she's writing this, and she's already so aware of the way to keep readers engaged. I'm thinking of the way in which, like, one letter writer will hint at something. Like, I think Mrs. Vernon writes that she suspects that Reginald will eventually go winter in London and see Lady Susan there. But then in this letter, Lady Susan confirms that. She says, yes, I've talked to Reginald about this. There's a lot of back and forth. And it's a bit like the way that we look at text message receipts today. Like, that's my modern connection, I think, from looking at all these letters. If you were going to go through someone's phone and see, like, all the people that they're talking to, there's a different method of conversing between your friends. But then there's also, okay, who are you sharing information with, and who might you kind of smudge things with in order to make yourself appear in a certain light.
And I think that's why Alicia's and Susan's letters are that much better, because they're completely unfiltered, I think. They're really honest. I think this is the first letter where we actually get it confirmed that Lady Susan is engaged to Reggie. Because it's kind of been hinted at and wondered about, but it's clearly stated here that that is the case.
And I almost feel like I missed that in reading this, because there's such a light touch to it. But the fact that they have this agreement, that speaks actually volumes. And yet the way that she talks about Reginald is still, the fact that she's having doubts, it's so contrary to the way that Mrs. Vernon, or Reginald's sister, Catherine, is always writing to her mother like, oh, Reginald's so great, no one could ever doubt how wonderful he is. And then Lady Susan's like, actually,
it's not that
great.
Know. But we know he's not that great because he falls for Lady Susan. He came in going, this woman's terrible. I just want to sit here and laugh at her and destroy people. And then he fell for her.
Yeah. He makes a huge about face, and then he starts to do another 180 where he's now concerned for Frederica a little bit, but then he's able to be convinced again. And even as Mrs. Vernon is trying to matchmake Frederica and Reginald, I can't help but be concerned for this poor child who's going from never being able to trust the truth and always having to sort of suit herself to the situation, to then potentially marrying someone who has trouble seeing the truth. Yeah, I don't know. What would you make of that?
Or just like, who is also your mother's second-hand goods.
Also that, and for the second time too, because James is also, started out as being interested in Lady Susan, and now it's an odd situation. I feel like Freud would have a huge time with this, but I don't want to get into that.
Sometimes I think that the theories say more about the theorist than other people.
Absolutely, they do, yeah.
But Lady Susan's really weighing up her options here, and she makes it really clear that she wants Sir Reginald to die before she marries Reginald. Otherwise, she won't gain anything from marrying him.
It's a bit Machiavellian in a way. She's like, ooh, yes. Do I want to be feared or loved? And in this case, she's just, again, like, to use that card game analogy, but she knows that if Reginald's father is alive, she will have to continue to mold her character exactly the way that will suit him. She's very observant. She's very attuned to the feelings of others, even when Mrs. Vernon is writing about an interaction with Lady Susan where she thinks, oh yeah, Lady Susan thinks that she had me fooled. A letter from Lady Susan will say, yeah, I was trying to get her, to believe my version, but I'm not sure if she bought it. So even there, she's still picking up on that kind of hesitancies of characters, but overall she knows what to say and how to say it in such a way. She could have made a great psychologist herself, but she knows that Reginald's father, there's sort of a fear in whether he will fully believe her, because if she's not able to get along with his parents or the person who's giving him money, she won't be able to act in the way she does. And certainly he wouldn't approve of her gambling, as you were talking about earlier, any of those debts that she might have to pay off. she wouldn't be able to do so as discreetly, perhaps.
I think that she would really overthrow the power balance in that family because she obviously dominates Reginald, she dominates Mrs. Vernon, and from what little we know of Lady De Courcy and Sir Reginald, I think she would dominate them as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what would it be like if she changed that family hierarchy? What kind of chaos do you think that would
Everyone would be so uncomfortable. I think they'd form like two little family units where they go and do stuff without Lady Susan and Reginald. But the thing is, his parents would never cut him off. They would continue to give him his allowance and they'd still want to see him. And maybe Lady Susan would still come with him to see them so she could lord it over them. But otherwise, I think the rest of the family will continue the way that they were. And it'll just be Reggie and Lady Susan sort of on the edge of things.
And thinking about cutting Reginald off, because I hadn't thought about that before. And so I'm trying to think of other Austen characters who are or have that threat over their heads, like is it Edward Ferrars in Sense and Sensibility, where I mean obviously he's such a different character than Reginald, but they're both beholden to their parents or to their inheritance to a certain extent there.
Oh, the Reginald can't get cut off. Edward can.
There's a bit of protection there, and it does, and I feel like, influence the way then that he's able to pursue this relationship against his sister's wishes, against, I guess, his father's. Well, I mean, it's not against his father's wishes because he writes back to him and is like, oh, it's okay.
That's fine. I believe all the lies that you've been told. If Reginald was a woman, it would be an entirely different thing. He has this freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He has this freedom to pursue a relationship the rest of the family would not be happy with.
Yeah. And actually maybe that makes it even an interesting thing then for him to be witnessing Frederica's interactions with James, because I would not in any way compare Lady Susan to James. She is not near as kind of insufferable as he seems to be. But there's this way in which Reginald very obviously sees that this is not the match to be made, whereas, you know, himself, he's blinded by his love for Lady Susan, maybe even his lust for her. And that also seems to be something that's within these letters, is the fact that we're not talking directly about desire, but it's very much there in between the lines.
Do you think that he is in love with her, or do you think he's blinded by lust?
That's such a good question. I think that he has kind of one of those hearts that will like attach. I think he's a bit like a puppy. So I think that it's I think he's been sort of won over by her, like the way that she's able to spin herself into the right kind of view for him. I think he is in love with her. I'm sure that, like, definitely I think there's lust as well, but I think he is in love. Just because I think he's the kind of person where it doesn't occur to him to lust without love, if that makes sense. I think he is, in a way, also beholden to his idea of morality and the sense, like morality from this time, not that there's anything wrong with lust and love being separate, but that he kind of has these two connected because he wants to be married at some point.
Well, because he's not having sex otherwise, presumably.
Yeah.
Because he's the type that would not, I think. He would not.
Yeah. I think that's a step he wouldn't overstep.
So I think maybe he's a little in love with, partly in love with the illusion of her, but also a little bit lustful, understandably, because he's in his 20s and has potentially never had sex, and I understand that's a big thing for guys.
Well, and Lady Susan is so great at knowing exactly what her like best attributes are. I think partly why I love her is because she knows herself so fully, and she's not afraid of everything that she has to offer. And I think that does, as a widower, right, people know that she has a sexual past. And so that's maybe even like intriguing to Reginald, who doesn't, or would appear doesn't. So she's like a more experienced woman in many ways.
And men are apparently really into that.
Yeah, it seems like it from this time and today too. There's a lot of ways in which this power like still holds true.
I guess maybe Lady Susan's a cougar. I understand Lady Susan being annoyed at Mr. Johnson. Admittedly, he's sick, it's not his fault, but she has come to London to see her friend, and now she can't see her. She's made this big trip, partly probably to get a bit of air away from Churchill where it's a bit suffocating, and try to get a little bit away from the entanglements that are happening there, and to see Mannering, obviously. But I think potentially the main thing was really to see Alicia, and now she can't. So it's understandable her being pissed off. And yeah, some people would be like, oh, I wish your husband would just die. She may also mean it seriously, and you can never tell with Lady Susan.
The thing is, it's not that I want Mr. Johnson to pass away in the night, but can you imagine a world in which Alicia and Lady Susan just rule the social classes together with their combined wealth? I don't know about Alicia's potential debts, but if she were to inherit, I feel like she quite easily could then invite Lady Susan to be a companion, and they could just live out the rest of their days in whatever way they chose.
Very happily living together, seducing men as they see fit. They're such modern women. They would be like, we don't really want to get married. We just want to live together and have some men come and go. But this is maybe our primary relationship. And that's a really modern thing to have. But they can't do that. That is not an option for them.
But it's painful in a way to see that, because they do have such a fun relationship and such a fun, I think actually like a fruitful friendship in a way that no one else quite sees the world as they do. And so they kind of rely on each other to provide that. Again, I know oftentimes Lady Susan is sort of writing because it benefits her. And maybe it's just me wanting to think that she does really deeply care for Alicia, but I'm happy to believe that, even if it's not, even if it's wrong. Even if it's not quite what Austen was implying, maybe, but...
I like the idea of them having at least one genuine relationship in their lives.
Exactly, and the fact that it comes from other women and it's not, reliant on a patriarchal society or the men that are in their lives. I think that's great. Give the Jane Austen review a follow. Shameless plug. We'll try to figure out a new annotation social at some point in the future. We've got one coming up with the Jane Austen Society in New Zealand. So thank you so much for hosting that. We're really excited about it in the summer.
So that's our discussion of Letter 29 of Lady Susan by Jane Austen. I'm Frances Duncan. This has been Elsa Keinberger. Links to our socials will be in the notes. Thank you for listening, and we wish you happy reading.